In other news, sadly, not everyone around the world has access to safe water and sanitation. The Africa Sanitation and 5th International Fecal Sludge Management Conference is taking place in Cape Town this week to discuss the dire state of hygiene and sanitation in Southern Africa, among other things. Well, joining us now from our studios in Cape Town is Chilufya Chileshe from Water Aid South Africa. Chilufya, good morning and thank you very much for your time this morning. Before we discuss these big challenges and the many challenges that we're facing in terms of ensuring that people have access to safe water and sanitation, just give us a sense of how the conference has been going so far, because it's running this week until Friday.
Yes, so the conference is the Africa Sanitation Conference, the 5th one, and it's being held together with the Global Fecal Sludge Management Conference, also the 5th one. And so far what we have seen is a discussion around the issues concerning access to sanitation and hygiene on the continent. In the opening session yesterday, there was an acknowledgement that up to 250 million Africans are still defecating in the open. So we are dealing with a problem of enormous proportions. There have also been good discussions happening around how do we bridge the inequality gap in terms of access to sanitation services, which is a big problem on the continent. There is definitely a sense of urgency because, you know, the Sustainable Development Goals require us to make significant progress by 2030 in terms of having everybody access sanitation and hygiene services.
Yeah, I mean, to make sure that those services are provided and access will require a lot of resources, particularly budget-wise, in terms of commitment from various governments to input the money. From your experience as Water Aid South Africa, or just Water Aid as this global NGO, do you think there's political will and commitment from various governments, for example, in Africa, to commit to make sure that those 250 million people do have access?
It's interesting you asked this question and actually mentioned political will, because all through yesterday, the one thing that was being constantly acknowledged is that right across the continent, we have made progress in terms of leadership of the water, sanitation and hygiene sector. So there is stated political will. For instance, we know President Cyril Ramaphosa has declared the SAFE initiative to ensure that public schools have adequate sanitation. But what lacks very often is that political will being backed up by budgets. So all across the continent, technocrats are saying, look, we are happy that our principals, that our political leaders are throwing their political weight behind the question of sanitation and hygiene, but it's not showing up in terms of budgets and monetary allocations. And that's really where the strongest messages we will be for this week from our perspective as Water Aid, is to say, look, political will is great, leadership is fantastic, but as long as you don't demonstrate that by allocating budgets and ensuring that the money is spent where it should be, targeted at the most vulnerable, political will doesn't do very much for us. And
we know that for as long as that remains a gap, women and children in our society bear the brunt. I mean, they are the worst end of this of this lack of access.
Yeah, definitely. So we know that open defecation and poor management of fecal sludge has much more significant implications for children. We know the number of children across our continent that are dying prematurely because of diarrhea. And that's why this is a big thing. There's been a lot of discussion around stunting of children, and we know that some of the contributors to that are poor hygiene practices, whether it's food hygiene, the drinking of unclean, unsafe water, and poor hand washing practices before feeding children. So those are some of the really critical things that we have to make sure are addressed by ensuring that people access good sanitation and hygiene services. And when it comes to women, we have just recently, and at the conference now, been sharing something we call a guide to developing female-friendly public toilets. Because as women become more active in public life, we have to ensure that they have access to toilets that are able to meet their needs to be able to fulfill their full potential.
Now, come Friday, as Water Aid, what would you look for to say this conference has been a success?
Yeah, I think from WaterAid's perspective, we are really looking for a really strong statement from our political leaders that this is an urgent matter. It requires that we act swiftly, that we are equipped with the resources that we need to solve the problem, that there are private sector actors that are committed to driving change through innovations, that there is a holistic look at the problem of sanitation, particularly from the perspective of addressing inequalities, because at the moment we know that a lot of our countries, particularly in Southern Africa, have very unequal access. So just looking at the coverage even in South Africa, you know, you will find that the people that have good services have them very good, and the ones that don't have very bad or nothing at all. So how do we begin to bridge those inequalities? What do we put in place to ensure that that we target the most vulnerable people that are marginalized and hard to reach?
Thank you very much. Chilufya Chileshe from WaterAid South Africa, talking to us about this conference that's underway in Cape Town that's mainly discussing access to safe water and sanitation.